but okay, so now we're going to record. And all right, so introductions are over, and this thing. Okay. All right, so all of us will engage in all of these, tap into all these goddesses at certain points in our lives. But the question is, if you really want to know yourself and you want to be comfortable with yourself, and also to be accepting of other women, because in a patriarchy, women will tend to criticize each other simply for things that are innate, that they can't control. But each one of these goddesses has a natural, healthy, innate side, and then a side that can go too far and gets corrupted by patriarchy. But again, you can't just blame patriarchy. You have to recognize it, because you do make choices. You just have to be really deliberate and careful about that. So here's the kind of archetype. So the archetypes relate to innate drives, really deep-seated drives that culture tries to integrate or repress or channel, right? And so, but it is something really basic. Every society is going to have some of these kinds of women, and some societies will encourage it and some societies will discourage it, but it is what it is. So in childhood, she tends to be independent, assertive, competitive, okay? I myself was not that way, but in my life, I've had to be a lot more assertive and aggressive than it really is natural for me. For me, I like to stay up late and get up in the morning, and my brain has been musing about something. And if I sit there long enough, I start having ideas about philosophy and all sorts of stuff. But I haven't been able to do that, right? When I'm a mom, I get up at 6:30 in the morning, I get one kid off to school, I go jogging and get another kid off to school, And then when I came here, I got up early in the morning, I went jogging, I got to get my day. So there's plenty of ways that you have to tap into these different energies. But at the end of the day, some of them are more natural than others. And coming to know yourself that way is important. And also not having friction. Some women just are that way. And if the women who aren't, they shouldn't let each other bother each other, right? Okay, in adolescence, the notion that you have focused consciousness, this kind of woman tends to have relationships with men that are like friends, sister brother relationships. They're not usually sexual. These aren't women that tend to sexualize relationships at all. Then when it goes too far, they tend to, their friends, want to get closer to them, and they tend to feel ignored. So these different types are on different wavelengths. And so you have to be sort of attentive to that. I have this friend, and I don't care, that she's assertive and aggressive and angry and frustrated all the time, because she always is so for the right reason. And she's always telling me why. And I always say, Linda, I know, I agree with you totally. So I hope that you don't let personality differences get in the way of admiring women who are, following sacred passions, doing good work, just making sure to affirm each other in these healthy passions, not affirm each other in some kind of perversion of them. Going to college. So all of you went to college. Did you really like coming because of the independence? And then I noticed, as I said, AUW, which student clubs does a woman like this choose, or does she start one of her own? Sports, protection to animals, environment. Do they bond with other sisters and have like a little sisterhood, sister group? Then I myself had trouble with this because And you can think about this in your education. How much of it is the Apollo, the god of reason, which is good. You know, there's nothing wrong with being objective and detached. But if every class you have is like that, you're not really learning about how to integrate this into your life. So you can think about if every class you have has tests and everybody's supposed to get pretty much the same answers, then you're just kind of running through, you know, you're a cog in a machine. And then classes like the humanities are supposed to help you figure out, well, how do I incorporate this into a way of life? And so I had difficulty with that. And that's why I like liberal arts colleges, because you're supposed to take these different kinds of classes and figure out ultimately how to live. Um, then what kind of a marriage does this woman have? Again, you can think about some woman you know or some woman in the public eye. She's faithful but independent. Um, as a mother, it says she tend to be good mothers because she fosters independence, teaches her young how to fend for themselves. And you could, a lot of you, your parents and your mothers included, wanted you to be independent. I've already read a lot of posts where you had mothers who wanted to go to college, but the grandpa didn't think it was right. So your mothers are really nurturing you. And that's great. All of that is good. And all of that, you know, comes back to these patterns. But are there other women you know who are hovering mothers and they don't want their daughter to go to college, not because they want her to get married, but they just don't want her to leave. So that's a different issue. But a Artemis mother likes to foster independence. Then college, again, I talked about linking faith and reason, and we already talked about that in one of the earlier classes. The dark side, right? If she gets too competitive, so sometimes um, this will happen with guys, but sometimes it happens with women that they compete against each other. Um, I don't know, in some capacity to get attention or to want to be in charge of something, and they end up wounding some other relationship. And so when you have a story of Artemis shooting an arrow and killing Orion, it's about psychic wounding, how people wound each other. And so first of all, Apollo was really nasty to set this up. He was jealous, and so he set it up, a competition, and got her to break up with her boyfriend, basically, because her brother was just jealous of the attention. It wasn't because the boyfriend wasn't a good guy. Um, he just didn't want her, you know, to get hooked, to get hitched to somebody, and he didn't want to just sit down and talk about it. Right? It's indirect. It's passive aggressive. It's really sad. Then the Olympics is supposed to be a nice outlet for aggression and competition. It was originally women, creating friendship bonds. Um, the dark side is anger. Well, first of all, there's a couple essays there, and we'll talk about them later. In this section of the class, I want you just to think about women you know whose lives follow the trajectory, and also if your life does or not, or something that triggered while I've been talking in the last few minutes. So later on, we'll talk about anger, what other women have written about anger. Um, but I had experiences of being subjected to a lot of male competition in my profession, and I don't like getting angry, and I didn't confront the men because I probably would have gotten in trouble for it. and partly because I kept blaming myself. So anger is a big issue. Now, right now in our country, we have a whole lot of really angry men, white men. And the thing about anger is underneath it, it's vulnerability and it's fear of not being able to flourish. And so a lot of my anger was I was not being able to get through grad school, and I had these kids and I had to provide for them. And so that was part of it. Another part of it to me was I valued philosophy and they were perverting philosophy. So, so there's that. Anyway, anger exhibits itself in a lot of ways for a lot of reasons, but women in particular are in a patriarchy. They experience it in ways that are different than men. Midlife, um, usually getting older doesn't bother this type. She doesn't worry about losing her looks or something. She's usually happy living alone. So going through whether she never married or whether she got divorced or something, she doesn't have to have a man, right? And she can have her girlfriends. Um, and then the Artemis, the situation in my country is that Apollo, the god of reason, is overvalued and wilderness preservation is undervalued, obviously. Recently, though, with Trump, it is very ironic and horrible to see that America has the most scientists and the most anti scientists. And that's because Americans are impulsive. But that's different. That's a different pattern than what we're looking at. So there's lots of ways to look at patterns, and we will get to that later on when we talk about Hecuba and Homer and the Iliad. Okay, we'll talk about that later. But in general, between this Apollo and Artemis, the science and technology is valued way more than wilderness preservation and balancing it. The 4 tasks, and then I just talked about that in my own situation. So if she falls in love with just being independent for its own sake, she might end up losing friends and being alone. But just being independent in a way that you don't unnaturally or unhealthily depend on other people, that's fine. So I just talked a little bit about applying it to myself. And actually, I didn't realize you don't have to, I don't want you to talk about me at all. I want you to talk about your way, right? You're supposed to imitate me or somebody you know. And I guess the other students told me that it was, I mean, it seems to me I'm revealing a lot, but the students in the past who've taken the class have told me that they like a good concrete example because then they can make the analogy with themselves. So, but I don't want you to talk about me at all in your groups. It's not about me. It's about showing you, like I'm the mediator between these great myths and your own life or the people you know. That's what I want. So everybody got it? You're just supposed to talk about examples you already wrote in class or something that occurred to you while I was talking. And I'll give you 15 minutes. And thank goodness we still have the same rooms. The technology didn't go bonkers on me. So here you go. Okay, Newsrot. Okay, just came. Okay, Newsrot. I'll how do you pronounce your name? I probably am wrong. Okay. I'll put you in. All right, how we end up with just one. Samantha, Elizabeth, I don't know. Only, oh no, there's two. Waken and Claire. Elizabeth. Alicia, where is Alicia? Where'd she go? Oh, pause. Okay, so I think everybody's back. So I'm going to talk, I'm going to, try to trigger a response by reading some of the poems that I have. And then some of you already brought poems or pictures, or music that if you can post in the chat and play for the other people in the group, that's great. But even if you can always add something you didn't bring. If something I say reminds you of another favorite poet or favorite essay that you have. So it's trying to be this collaborative group exercise. So the other thing I want to know at the end of this third breakout session of 15 minutes, I'm going to ask for your reactions. We're going to take a vote. Like, how many of you think the breakout sessions are too long, too short, or about right? So I just need feedback on that for organizing the next class. Okay, so I was pointing out last time. So how did okay. First of all, I love humanities. I was a humanities buff way back, but I wasn't a poet. I wasn't a poetry freak. That didn't particularly appeal to me. And then life experience, right? Sort of, I have these emotions and they emerge, and poetry really spoke to me in a way that nothing else really could. So I don't know if you all feel that way, but there's something about poetry because it's reflecting on your emotions, but it's much closer to that part of your brain that would experience the emotion than analysis, right? So you could diagnose, a person saying that they have an electrocomplex, or they have, but it's so distant. So I started getting into the stuff that's more immediate, and so my experiences, I didn't know what was going on. And then I started to see the pattern, and then I started to read the poems and the books. And so that's what art is. Art is something where you're reading it and it's speaking to you, but somehow the artist has been able to cross the boundary between just their own personal obsessions or preoccupations. They've been able to make that transition. Okay, there's a pattern here. Like, this isn't just about me. It's about life. And sometimes it's about a woman's life. Sometimes it's about just human life. And so to me, that's what artists do that nobody else can do, because they appeal to sensuality, right? Hearing, seeing, or they'll maybe have language, but it always brings you back to something pretty sensuous. But that's the gift of the poet. So the first, another thing is that the poetry that I show, you could always look up and let's see, you can always look up and find out, more work that's done by these women. But Mary Oliver, for example, has a whole, she's very well known in the US, but I would rather you find out women from your countries than from my country, right? But it is FYI if you're interested. But I really like reading about women. Not only are they from other countries, but they have experiences that are different. And yet, as poets, they're able to communicate it in a way that I can identify with. And so when I read art, I can identify with it. And then I start to see myself just as a woman per se. But this one, like the first one, is just any kid, male or female, could identify with this, which you remember in springtime, when you're in school, especially in the springtime, so spring surrounded the classroom and we suffered to be kept indoors. You all ought to have remembered some experience like that, right? Everybody gets so stir crazy when the weather starts getting warmer. Now, the thing about that is it shows you that I grew up in the hemisphere and the latitude, the longitude that I did where there was this seasonal change, right? It's cold and then it starts getting warm. But some of you live in countries where the seasons don't change that much. Although, having lived in Indonesia, there's also that change from having it rain every day to being able to go outside because it's not raining. So maybe that's, what you remember is that on a day where the weather is sunny and dry and nice, you just want to get out and, you don't want to be in school. So that stuff is so fascinating to me. And then, that was a funny story where she found out her teacher that she thought was all brains and no heart ends up they catch her in the arms of the art teacher. So that was funny and it's very human. I know some people. I know people where a nun ends up, running away with a teacher at the school she teaches at, stuff like that. Okay, this is Annie Dillard. Um, Annie Dillard is a really great art, nature loving poet or writer. And one of her well-known books is Pilgrim at Tinker Creek. And again, I'd rather have you find artists from your own countries or not from the US. But her one thing is this ability to see, to actually turn off all your other brain and just use your eyeballs. And that's, again, something men or women could value. I remember at a certain point after I had tenure and I could relax a little bit after decades, I started taking pictures because I loved Greece and my parents bought me a nicer camera than I'd ever had. And I remember I would go on a hike and I would put my camera on my elbow, my shoulder, and I would say, stop thinking, stop thinking. And at the beginning, I'd always think, oh, I'm never going to be able to do this. But after about 20 minutes, I would all of a sudden, everywhere I looked was a picture. I could just see things in terms of a photograph. And the nice thing of that, you just are in this different mode. And it was so amazing that I could actually train myself to do that. But the other nice thing about it was that I got the pictures developed and I put them into, I can send them to you, but it doesn't matter. It's just my little hobby. But when I showed them to my friends, it was so wonderful because they'd start looking at them and all of a sudden they would get very calm, you know? And it wasn't, they didn't go, oh, you're really good. You know, it wasn't that. It was just they got absorbed in my pictures. And so that's amazing to me. You know, again, that's a common bond. We all can appreciate beautiful you know, the way that my mother was an art historian. And so she always looked at my pictures. She said, it's so well framed, Martha, you know? And I used to take about 10 minutes to sort of get it all together. But that the only reason I'm saying that is that we all have this capacity to just use our eyeballs or use our ears just for the pleasure, you know, it doesn't have anything to do with survival. We can all just appreciate the world that we live in, the natural world. And so that's what her books are about, and they are very amazing. Um, and here's another one where she talks about the study of nature is a limitless field, the most fascinating adventure in the world. That is definitely an Artemis person, right? And it's true, like it's true for anyone. It's just that the Artemis person is the one that's going to show you the red flag and say, remember this part of your humanity, you know? You are this too. You have this capacity. Um, okay, and the next one was, all right, the next part was her trying to be an artist and suffering a lot and having to play many roles. I've had to fight to get my work seen and understood. The roles of wife and mother, working woman have eaten away at me in a way that they didn't with her husband. She had an artist husband. Um, and then of course you resent it because it's a double standard. Um, and the art world is has trends and it's very sexist. And some of my students in this class had my class on philosophy of art, and they know, you know, what was considered art, what's been trendy for centuries in the West has been so biased against women. So you could think about that in your countries. You know, when you go to an art museum or you have a national, you know, what does your culture consider art? Is it all men? Is it art that has a patriarchal perspective? And definitely in starting a couple decades ago, women all over the world are emerging. And because of the online, because of the electronic world, the internet, they can get a voice, which is another reason why we should be finding them and putting them together into a book and increasing this emergence of women in art, because it really has been, they really have been marginalized. Um, okay, then there's one about the emotional distance, and that poem reflects that. Um, you must be able to do three things: love what is mortal, hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it, and when the time comes to let it go, let it go. So that would be a Artemis kind of person who says you have to let things you love go, right? Demeter isn't going to agree to that. You know, some of the other goddesses, no way, Jose. Um, all right. So then this is Adrienne Rich is another well-known female poet in the US. And then here, the skeptical feminist, this is a quote where she says, whenever in their determination to escape the evils of the past, feminists react too hastily and discard too much, and in doing so make their plans for a feminist future less good for everyone than need to have been, they're allowing the shadow of the past to stay with them. Okay, well, this is that stereotype about the feminazi, right? The angry woman, and she's critical of the angry woman. And later on, I have some excerpts from essays where they say, no, it's fine for women to be angry. They have a lot to be angry about. So then you have to think your own thoughts about that. Well, what do you think about that? Let's see, the next one. Oh yeah, the love of science, right? It should be natural for Artemis types to love science. And, but the problem here is the way that the West has interpreted reason and science, and it's very gendered. And that's what this book is about, the man of reason. It's the way that your reasoning powers are being exercised, what gets rewarded is all destructive of nature. It's very male, competitive, domination. Um, as opposed to other ways of studying nature, as you know, you lose yourself in the natural world. You Barbara McClintock was pretty famous for that. Let's see, what else did I want to read from? Oh, so then there were two examples of two scientists who really tell horror stories about their experience of and one of them, Naomi, was an experimental psychologist, right? I do research on vision. The profession has considered this on the part of one of my sects to be an outrageous violation of the social order. Okay, so these are women in the 60s and in America in the 60s. And whenever you hear the feminist movement being trashed, I was ignorant of it, but now I really appreciate what they did and how much they suffered in order to change things for us, right? And so I myself have to, my book is partly just gratitude for them and picking out their quotes and passing that history on. And so each of you can find the women in the back of your life and your country who have helped push you forward, and you pick those quotes to push that forward. Let's see. Um, yeah, and then so she just describes how the whole process goes, and you're supposed to smoke a pipe, and you know, if you don't smoke a pipe and have a beard, women don't belong in grad school. Puff on their pipes. I mean, this is so disgusting. I don't know if you know how surprising this is to you, but I guess I'm old enough to know that, yeah, I get that. Um, let's see. Yeah, and then they asked her, "Do you mind if I run your experiment?" Right? They wouldn't ask a man that. They would accept the results. It's so insulting and it's so degrading. What is she supposed to say, right? Um, and then, oh yeah, somebody said he had difficulty working with men. He had gotten burned, and so she couldn't use the lab. If you're doing this kind of stuff, you need some really expensive equipment. So she didn't get access to it. And so she talks about that. And then I'm going to have to move on because I want to get you back in groups. But Evelyn Fox Keller also has a huge horror story to tell. And then and that's how she became politically aware, right? Both of these women were very intellectual and successful, and they didn't anticipate this because they had always teachers who rewarded them, but they get to grad school when it's about a job, and all of a sudden it all changed. But so then they became aware of the need to change political life, our collective life. Okay, yeah. And so she finally changed to molecular biology, even though she loved theoretical physics, which is too bad because, you know, she should be able to do what's natural to her. Okay, and then the anger essay is about when people are angry, they feel like they deserve to be treated differently, and they have righteous indignation, and that's why they're angry. And so women are not allowed to be angry because they're not considered fully human, right? They're not respectable enough to be able to make claims of respect and to be able to demand being treated differently, which means getting angry. So I think that it is true. Anger isn't just that you have a bad temper, and there's a fundamental difference in the way people think of their basic humanity that's a lie, and that gives rise to what acceptable anger is in a man and acceptable anger in a woman. And so these emotions not only are based in our natural, we get angry because we're afraid or vulnerable, but also the gendered aspect of it, which means you're more likely to have a lot more to get angry about, and you're more likely to be criticized for getting angry, which is a really bad situation to be in. And I was experienced a lot of that too, and I remember thinking, I'm just becoming an angry person, and I didn't want to be an angry person. It's not natural to me, but what do? When you don't seem to have a lot of choices, or when you're getting treated so badly. So why don't you go back to your groups? I'll open the rooms, and you can think of whatever you already brought or whatever comes to mind since I was talking. There you go.